It's one thing to put somebody in the ring to get experience. It's another thing to train them so that when they stand up in front of a jury, they understand how to make eye contact and how to be intentional with their pace of their speech. If they just work on that, making eye contact and slowing down, most people would be much, much better. And then understanding and being intentional with their emotional state, proper use of your hands and use of visuals and how to create space or create illusions in the courtroom so the stories come to life. That is a whole different skill.
This is RVA Trial Lawyers, Virginia's trial lawyer podcast, hosted by Sharif Gray and Niall Abuzaki.
All right, we're back, RVA Trial Lawyers, and today we have Dan Ambrose. Dan, I was stuck in a ton of traffic coming down from Northern Virginia, the DC area today, from a court hearing, and I was thinking about my interview of you today, and a couple things really stood out to me. I remember a few years ago, I found this thing called Trial Lawyers University online, and I was like, what is that? I think this was before the one in Vegas in 2022 or so. And I remember being like, yikes, I just started personal injury work, and it looks like these people know what they're doing. So I remember signing up for a scholarship and very grateful for Sean Claggett to help me make the trip and by covering the cost of the ticket to attend your event. And whether you like it or not, your event is responsible for much of the growth that I've had and the results that my clients have been able to walk away with over the last few years. It was your event where not only did I meet a number of incredible other trial lawyers, but it really lit the fire and gave me opportunities to learn from some of the best and brightest. And I will go one step farther and say your event has taken the standard of what training should be and elevated it. So anyways, I'm deeply grateful for what you have done for me and my clients and our firm and everything I've learned from your events and all the people I've met through your event. And so it's a privilege to have you here joining us on the podcast. So thank you for being here.
Well, Sharif, I appreciate all those kind words and I appreciate being here. And I started TLU in the pandemic because I didn't have a choice. But I was all by myself and I needed to learn, and I want to learn from the greatest trial lawyers in the country. And so I got them all to come on to my, webinars and break down trials and teach me. And then the pandemic fortunately came to an end or tailed off in 2021. And we did our first live conference in Vegas. And then you were at the one in 2022. And now I've been doing live conferences ever since then and working on improving every conference, every time I do it. And the one we most recently did in Huntington Beach, I really believe was the highest standard that that was the greatest event that we've ever done. I mean, it had everything anybody could ever want in an educational event. We bought out the entire hotel on the Paseo on the ocean. So everybody in the hotel was with us. So it felt like almost the community of a college dorm, because you talked a little bit about community. And so that made it special. There was 8 workshop tracks and 4 lecture tracks. And so people had lots of choices every day. So people were learning in smaller groups that were focused on a topic that they were interested in, not a topic that the people who put on the event, determined they must go see. So people had a choice on where they want to be. And then, and then when people do the workshops, they have to meet up in small groups ahead of time to prepare. And so that creates community and connection. And then we did a full breakfast and a full lunch for everybody with, bacon and eggs and tremendous food outside every day. So that, for an hour and a half. So that builds community. And then we had theme parties every night. And, with food trucks and live music and live band karaoke out on the ocean. I mean, it was everything that I wanted to be from head to toe, from the great learning to the great networking, the great community, great fun. And, it's even be better next year. And so, just keep working on improving, making it better. Because for me, it's all about the attendee. If the attendee is getting what they need, then everybody else, then the vendors are going to get what they need and the speakers are going to get what they need. But, there's 3 real audience at every conference. And in order to make it, spectacular, you have to focus on each one of them and try to, think and make sure each group of people is having an amazing time, because you can't do a conference without 3 of them. And that's what we really strive to do, is make sure everybody wins at TLU.
Yeah. Well, again, I've been very fortunate to have attended not one, not two, but I think three of your events. Two in Vegas, one in Huntington, and I wasn't able to go to the one in New York. But certainly, I mean, getting to your events is something that I continue to make a priority because it's made a difference for me, and it's almost become to some extent like a little bit of a club might be the wrong word, but like a community. Like I show up and I'm like, oh wow, see those people again. And one thing that I've started to learn, Dan, is that you start seeing the same people over and over again at your events, at other events. And what I'm starting to take away is it's because those same people, they're constant learners. They recognize there's always more to learn. And so they're there, right? And so I think that's the type of person that you attract, or the type of trial lawyer that you attract. And it's really led to something cool. And what's really wild is, and I think most people don't understand this, but you came up doing criminal defense work, right? Like, so what led to criminal defense to personal injury? Because my understanding is, I mean, your conferences, they're not about criminal defense. Is that right?
That's true. I was a criminal defense lawyer for 17 years in the suburbs of Detroit, Michigan. It was a good experience, but it was rather, if anybody's ever been a criminal defense lawyer knows that it's thankless work, it's extremely stressful, and it doesn't pay at all. And so, I was roommates with Nick Raleigh back in 2000, and I think 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008 at the Trial Lawyers College. So we became friends. And then in 2012, he invited me out to watch him present at Cala in Las Vegas. And I met some people out there, became friends with them. And within 2 weeks, I'd moved to California and was on a new journey to make a new life for myself at age 45 in the great state, sunny California. And so, and obviously I can't get started. It started with me teaching workshops at my apartment just on trial presentation skills, whatever I knew about it back then. It was really just a way to create community around me and have some interaction and make some friends because, I was 45 years old. That is not the ideal age to move from one state to another and start over. Just saying, as far as socializing, especially if you're not able to get a job, not that I ever have a job. Like when people ask me, what's the job market out in California? I'm like, how should I know? I'm never going to get a job. I'm unemployable. But like, what are you going to do? I'm like, start consulting on people's cases. Like, but you're not a trial consultant. I'm like, so? Doesn't mean I can't become one. All I got to do is learn a little bit. These people, most people are terrible at trial, terrible at presenting. And so that's what I was going to offer that. And then I started doing witness preparation for people, like professionally. I'd fly around the country and prep people's witnesses for testimony, for deposition or trial. So that's how we kind of got started into the civil world, because I didn't want to be a criminal defense lawyer anymore because I was tired of being stressed out and broke and it wasn't any fun. So I decided I'm going to become a personal injury lawyer.
And here we are. One thing that I find myself repeatedly when asked to give advice about getting into trial work is I actually do tell people, go be a criminal lawyer, like go be a prosecutor, go be a public defender, go kind of get your sea legs doing criminal work. I benefited greatly, Dan, from being in the Army JAG. And I don't think at the time I appreciated just how much experience I got compared to my peers. But my first few years in the Army, I did everything from rape juries to I even flew overseas for a trial in Egypt. And I remember thinking, oh, this is the norm. And then when I got out and a few years later transitioned to civil work, I don't think at that point is when I started to appreciate, wow, like to get trial experience, it's in the civil world is difficult. So that's why you really need to be focused on getting the right trainings. But to this day, Dan, I recognize criminal work can be a grind, and certainly the pay is not as great, but from an experience standpoint, you just can't beat it, right? Even to this day, right? And if you look at some of the greats, Jerry Spence, Rick Friedman, a lot of those guys started out actually doing criminal work. Is that when a young lawyer comes to you and says, hey, I want to be a trial lawyer, are you pointing them towards criminal work first, of course, in addition to the trainings and all that?
Well, first, that people have to train. If people don't train and they go to trial, they're just improvising. And sometimes it works out, but it typically doesn't, because the skills that are required to be effective in the courtroom are different than the rest of the skills it takes to write a brief or to live your life. And so I think it's a good idea when people get trial experience, but when people go into trial untrained, or so many of these bigger firms, let's call them high volume firms. I see it over and over. They send a young lawyer to trial, oh, we're just going to get them some experience. I'm like, yeah, they're getting experience getting their asses kicked. They're getting experience being humiliated in front of a group. And that experience can only last typically 2-3 times before a person quits. And they're like, this is not for me. So it's one thing to put somebody in the ring to get experience. It's another thing to teach them, train them, so that when they stand up in front of a jury, they understand how to make eye contact, at least eye contact with these people, and how to be intentional with the pace of their speech, to slow down. If they just work on that, making eye contact and slowing down, most people would be much, much better. And then, when you also add on basically being understanding and being intentional with your emotional state, or, proper use of your hands and use of visuals, and how to create space or create illusions in the courtroom so that stories come to life. That is a whole different skill, but each skill builds upon itself. And, skills have to be learned and then practiced, and then you get comfortable with it. But you got to keep practicing it, because if you learn a new skill and you don't keep practicing it, guess what happens, Sharif?
Yeah, no, it goes away.
It disappears, right? We all know that about skills. And trial lawyering is a skill. It's not just, I help people. Just get up there and be yourself. Be authentic. I'm like, himself or herself is a nervous, shaky, insecure mess. You cannot be that in a courtroom and expect to win. Nobody follows somebody who's scared, somebody who's insecure. They follow confident people. And if you know your case and you know you're right, why would you be insecure? You wouldn't be, except people get nervous because they don't practice. They're not used to standing in front of people, and it's like, we don't want to put your practice in. You don't want to learn. Well, you can't expect to get great results if the only time you practice, the first time you do your opening, the first time you do your actual cross is in the courtroom with a jury. Give me a break. That's a recipe for disaster. So people got to practice. People got to train. Do I think going to the public defender's office is a good idea? Yes and no. If people go there and they get some training, and they go training before they get there, but the training I see at these public defender's offices and in general is crap. And it's and they don't get much better. That's all I can say. So I'm kind of lukewarm on the whole public defender thing. If you're going to get some trial experience, great, but you also got to train so you know what you're doing in there, so it's meaningful experience and not just an experience getting your ass kicked like most public defenders get their asses kicked. And so it makes it tougher.
No, and I agree completely. Like there's a component of getting the experience, but the experience without meaningful guidance is not nearly, you're not capitalizing on that experience. And so, in a perfect world, right, a young lawyer finds a mentor at a firm, and that mentor helps train them, sends them to events
in
like
a perfect
yourself.
world.
Right. In a perfect world. Not easy to do. Right. But yeah, no, I agree completely. And I guess reflecting on my own experience, Dan, I've benefited from it. I've been able to find ways to get the practical experience, to develop the sea legs and the confidence, right? But at the same time, have really benefited from going out to events like yours and others, which so getting the training as well. And then another point is, to the skill atrophying point, it's right? Like if you don't show up in a courtroom, you're going to get rusty. So you need to find other ways to practice, be it focus groups or jumping in on other trials, second chairing, all that. But then also there's this. The trial is constantly evolving. At least that's my perspective. I've even seen at your events how the presentations have changed over the years because of the nature of our juries. For example, one thing that I'm noticing is visuals are far more talked about at events like yours and others than they may have been a few years ago, because I think we're starting to find as trial lawyers just how important being capable with visuals and using visuals in trial is for communicating that message.
I agree. I mean, it's like visuals are critical, but people knowing how to use visuals is important. And sometimes I think people much over rely on visuals and kind of try to and often substitute that with their actual connection with the jury. So I always recommend strongly to people that there should be no visuals up in the first 5 minutes, maybe even 10 minutes of an opening statement, so that it's just the trial lawyer up there connecting with the jury. Because like when I do a presentation on performance skills, on cross-examination, on jury selection, or on witness prep, I don't use any visuals, because when I've used them in the past, they just kill my connection and my teaching. So, again, visuals are great, but you got to know how to learn. You got to learn the rest of the game really before you start to use the visuals, and how to effectively. Not many people ever should get much training on the most effective way to use visuals. And so if you're going to use them, practice with them, get feedback, get some coaching.
Now, Dan, I want to shift gears and talk about like some of the casework that you've done. My understanding is that you are consulting on personal injury cases, right? You've actually taken that jump from criminal work. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. I work on a lot of different cases.
Yeah. What does that work typically look like?
Well, the thing that I bring to the table more so than anybody else is the performance aspect of this. So a lot of times people, are getting ready for their opening and their voir dire. And so, we'll get a focus jury together and spend 2 hours where they just get up and they run their voir dire, just like they're running their voir dire at trial, in the same sequence, the same questions. So that way we can take that and play it back. Because every time a jury gives us an answer, there's multiple things. There's a variety of things we respond back to them. And one is superior to the rest. And so it's just about, for them, it's like, I kind of look like voir dire is like, our answers are kind of like a filing cabinet in our mind. So that way, when the jury says something to us, we have the right, and we come up with the right answer. Or we have a response, especially things that jurists say that in voir dire that are maybe somewhat confrontational. For example, if a juror was to say, Mr. Gray, I understand everything you're saying, but I really just don't have any idea how we would calculate a dollar amount or the value for things like loneliness or pain, because I've never put a price on those things before. So I'm not quite sure how I would do it. So with that kind of jury response, which is very predictable, right? If you've been picking juries for a while and for money, you're going to get that question. How do we possibly calculate it? Have you ever got that question, Sharif?
I have. Absolutely.
Okay. And most lawyers will say to them, well, you know what? At the end of this trial, I'm going to show you how to do it. And so if I show you how to do it, and it makes sense to you, are you willing to do it? Be willing to follow the law? Something along those lines. They often bring the law in. But I think a better way to handle it is, first of all, whenever there's resistance, you have to meet people where they're at before you could take them where you want them to go. So, for example, if they said that, you might say, you know what, Mr. Gray, that's a really good question you asked. How do we figure out the number? How do we put a price? Not the cost of the price, but the value on these types of human losses. In fact, I bet you're not alone. I bet some other people are probably thinking the same thing. Who else here is like Sharif that you know what? How do we do it? And you're going to see a lot of hands go up, right? So people are like, all right, now you know who your audience is. And you just made that person feel like they're not alone. Nobody likes to be alone. And then also you're rewarding their courage for speaking up and giving you a little friction. Because only with friction can we identify our problems. Thank God this person said that. Because then you say, things like medical bills or lost wages, you can just pull out your phone, open the calculator up, punch the numbers in, and hit the equal sign. And you know what the cost of the price is. And that's easy. But things like loneliness, chronic pain, not being able to hold your grandchild, not being able to enjoy even chewing food and eating. These are all human experiences that only human beings can really understand the value of. And, because You can't put these into a calculator to get to find out what they're worth. But I think the people that started or founded this country, I think they knew that. And so for the last 250 years, people like us have been gathering in courtrooms like this, not to determine the cost of the price of these human losses, but the value of what was taken. And so let me ask you this question. That's called the refocusing move. Can you think of any better way, other than this, to get people together from the community, listen to what happened, and for them to determine the value of what was taken? And so some of us were then people like, okay, now it makes sense. So you just totally reframed it and empowered the jury and let them know this is how we do it here. And we're not looking for the cost of the price, but we're looking for the value. So that's just an example of, you know what I mean? So you can practice that shtick. You got to practice this shit. You got to practice running that exact script or any script, whether somebody says, oh, what good will the money do? How's the money going to help? Right? Money's not going to take the pain away. So again, more resistance, right? Deal the same way. Sharif, you know what? I bet you're not alone. I bet there's a lot of other people who are thinking, how's this money going to help? We can't we can't bring Johnny back. And you see all their hands go up. And then you say, well, let me ask you this question. That's called the refocusing move. What would perfect justice look like in a case like this? Let's say it's a disc case, right? I mean, wouldn't it be if somehow we could just step into a time machine and push a button and the earth spins back on its axis? This never had to happen. And before that cars crash, we could just stop time. Everybody lets know and say, hey, this guy stops at the light. These cars go through. This never happens, right? I mean, wouldn't that be perfect justice, Sharif? But we don't have the power to do that. All we can do for justice is award money. We call this money justice or civil justice. I know it's not enough. I know it's far from perfect, but it's all we got. Does that help you better understand? So things like that, right? And then if there's still resistance, you can say, well, here's another way to think about it. There are some countries in the world, they have a different form of justice. We call this an eye for an eye. So we lived in a country like that. What would justice require us to do to the defendant once we prove our case against them? What would we have to do to them? And people are like, right, we'd have to take a bat or put them in a car and somehow rupture the disc in their back, just like they hurt my client. But that would be barbaric, wouldn't it? And thank God we're civilized. Thank God for the defendant. Thank God for all of us we're civilized. It's one thing to put somebody in the ring to get experience. It's another thing to train them so that when they stand up in front of a jury, they understand how to make eye contact and how to be intentional with their pace of their speech, to slow down. If they just work on that, making eye contact and slowing down, most people would be much, much better. And then understanding and being intentional with their emotional state, proper use of your hands and use of visuals and how to create space or create illusions in the courtroom so that stories come to life. That is a whole different skill. So those, that's why you got to practice. And, with practice in the opening statement, practice, condensing it, practice applying speed trial to it, practice cutting out all the bullshit you don't need. They know that when you practice. But that's really the main things I do for consulting. I do witness prep, drafting cross, performing cross, because then during like that focus group, we do the opening, voir dire opening, cross to direct. So they're practicing a little bit each piece of trial. Then we replay it, coach it, and then do the same thing again the next day. And then replay it, coach it the next day. And maybe like a month ahead of time. So that way, by the time you get to trial, this is just running through your brain constantly once you got up and physically do it. People that do their opening statement for the first time in trial, that's insanity to me. But there are some people that can do it. But, maybe after 40 years. But generally, people should practice.
No, it makes sense, right? Kids who play a sport, like let's say take soccer, for example, they don't just show up to the game, right? They go practice with the team. So why should practice? Trial lawyers do the same. So it is interesting, and I'd be interested in your thoughts as to why practice is not something that's really instilled or ingrained in trial lawyers. I think the default is, if at least something that I think I would have done before I started really learning how to become a better trial lawyer, it would be like everybody else, right? Like, all right, I got a trial coming up. I'm going to write out my opening, write out my directs, crosses, all that. Or actually, I probably wouldn't even write out crosses beforehand. You just do the T on the notepad, right? Which is ineffective. But where do you think that comes from? That just the default is no practice. The default is just show up and do it, despite the lack of training in law school and the lack of professional training that's focused on trial skills after law school.
Well, I think it comes from the fact that nobody's been trained. So nobody has anything to practice. If they get up and practice something, they're not really practicing, they're performing. Because practice means you're doing intentional movements. Practicing typically indicates you have a coach giving you feedback, or somebody's giving you feedback, or you're recording yourself and giving yourself feedback. If you haven't been trained, how do you know what's appropriate eye contact? How do you know how to move your hands? How do you know how to control your voice and your face? And what is good and what is what's effective and what's not effective? How could you possibly know that? You couldn't. And so I think that's a little bit of the frustration and disconnect too, is that people don't have anything to practice. And practicing is not performing, by the way. When people do a mock trial on their a focus group on their own trial, that is performing. It's just not performing in the courtroom, but it's performing in your office or wherever you're doing your mock trial. But most people, they run it and they ask questions, but they don't record the video. They don't have a performance coach look at that video with them and say, oh my God, what am I doing? And people do it with their hands and their faces, and they bite their lips, and they got so many tics, I can't even mention them all. But every one of those is a distraction and breaks the connection with your audience.
That's right. And they don't even realize it unless they engage in intentional practice.
Right. They don't even realize it. They just lose cases. They have no idea why they lost. They can have great set of facts, but they blame, especially the absolute worst is when people blame anything but themselves. When they blame the judge, they blame the jury instructions, or they blame the jury, they blame the defense lawyer. And every one of those things that they blame is going to keep them exactly where they're at. Because you're not going to change if you think it's the problems everywhere around you and not right here. So that's just another thing with this practice. If you lose, you better own it 1,000%. You should drive me crazy losing. I mean, it still drives me crazy. Like losing, I don't care how bad the facts are, losing would consume me for months. And that was terrible too. But you're going to keep losing if you don't train and get better, period.
That's right. And I mean, looking back on my few years doing personal injury, I mean, certainly lost a handful of cases, and each one I certainly try and look back and see what I could have done differently. Right. Now that said, I do applaud those who are willing to go into courtroom, win or loss. There just aren't enough people, I think, in the plaintiff's bar who are willing to actually go try cases. Of course, we wanted them to do it intelligently, and we want them to do it with the right training. But my view is there's no such thing as a true loss. I mean, yes, you cannot get the result that you want. You're disappointed. Your client's disappointed. But the willingness to go the distance and the willingness to learn from the loss or the win, I think, is super important.
It's only a true loss if you don't learn from it.
That's right.
Either you win or you learn.
That's right. But I don't want to forget, while I've got you, I mean, you and I have talked over the years. I know a lot about your conferences and all that, but what I don't know a lot about, Dan, is the 17 years of work you did as a criminal defense lawyer in the suburbs of Detroit. Is there a case or two that stands out to you that you'd be able to share with us?
Well, my one murder trial stands out broadly in my head because I basically did the case pro bono, and it was a self-defense case. And it was the craziest case ever because my client, Reginald Burks, was a security guard, and he was just driving down his neighborhood streets, but it's a rough neighborhood, with his brother DeJuan. And somehow they got this confrontation, yelling at some people, and they're yelling back, and the people that are yelling back at them pulled out a gun and started shooting at him. So my client, who's a security guard, pulled his gun out and shot back. And in this shooting, one of the passengers in the car got his head blown out, like a bullet right in the center of his head. But what we were able to prove was that the bullet actually came from the driver's seat and not from the where my client was positioned. Because if it had come through the back window, like the police officers and the prosecutor alleged, well, the blood spatter would have gone from the back of the vehicle towards the front. Well, the clear the path was towards the back of the vehicle. Pretty obvious, right? I mean, I don't know anything about forensics or my first murder case. But clearly the prosecutor, the cops, investigators had to know this, but they were just so crooked, so dishonest that they were willing to. And my client only got arrested because he went to the police station because they had arrested the wrong person. They had arrested this young man named Chris Bohannon that the people in the car had all picked out of a lineup, and he wasn't even there. Yet the fact that 4 people picked the same guy out of a lineup who's not even there and don't pick out the guy who's there, that wasn't like a red flag for the police that maybe there's a collusion here. Oh boy, but the Detroit police, I know how they are then, but I can't imagine the number of innocent people stuck in these Michigan prisons. It was so frustrating. So that took like a month and a half to try that case. Jury was out 10 minutes and acquitted them. And it was a knockdown, drag-out battle for like 6 weeks, over Christmas, no less. That was pro bono. That was my most memorable verdict. Wait, but then it got better because then I represented his little brother on an attempted murder case because he'd shot a couple of people with a sawed-off shotgun. Of course, that was self-defense. But actually, it was self-defense. You wonder why he's got a sawed-off shotgun, but it's a long story. But I got the guy acquitted. A very difficult case. And then he goes out and actually murders somebody in cold blood like a month later and stole the cell phone and just murdered this poor fella. And people are like, you feel bad about it? I'm like, no, I don't feel bad about it. I was just defending the one case. What the psycho does in the future. The prosecutor should feel bad about it because they could have gave him a plea deal, give him 2 years, but they wanted to give him like 7. But he'd never been in trouble before. So my 2 most interesting cases, I think, they were connected to one another and both took about 10 years off my life. But those were the days that I don't
What
longer
are some
have.
things that you wish civil lawyers learned from criminal lawyers?
I think being a criminal lawyer really helps you practice and get a lot of time on cross-examination because as a criminal lawyer, you can't win a case if you don't know how to cross. If you can't destroy the prosecutor's case, not poke holes, but literally destroy it, you're not going to have a real good shot at winning. So I'd say the cross-examination, because like cross-examining cops is a very, very high-level skill. It's like cross-examining a doctor because people want to believe their police officers. They want to believe their doctors. And society holds them on a high stage. And so, to knock them off that stage, you got to be real good at cross. And every time I'd come across, adverse, like when I was practicing every day with every cop, as soon as I look at that guy or like somebody claimed to be a victim, I'm like, here's the question today. Are you a better liar than I am cross-examiner? Or am I a better cross-examiner than you are a liar? Because we're going to find out in the next 30 minutes. So I think cross is the thing that criminal lawyers generally do better than civil lawyers. Again, I think most people that I've seen, they don't do it very good, but better than, because of reps.
Absolutely. And so 17 years doing criminal defense work, right? And then now you're in the personal injury space. So where...
Yeah, but I got to get my trials in because I haven't had many. Maybe I've been involved like maybe a dozen personal injury trials, but not repeatedly. So I really got to, I'm working on finding a couple cases to co-counsel. So that way I'll make that trial lawyer so much better and everybody in their firm that's working on the case so much better than they've ever been before. And in exchange, we'll get a better verdict and, I'll get my reps in, which I'm really looking forward to. So, and that's going to be a real trial lawyers university when, teaching in the context of a case. But everybody wants to train on their case. Nobody likes to train just for the sake of training. Like, oh, I don't have time. I'm like, you don't have time? I hope you have time for losing. Because if you don't have time to train, how do you ever expect to be a champion? It makes no sense.
Right. And it's amazing to me how, just looking at my own calendar, how just the time just flies by. Right. And it's something about this work, but it's just so calendar heavy, deadline heavy that if you don't make room for the actual training, and it's a struggle for us. I mean, it's a constant struggle, right? I mean, from trying to bring in cases, work cases up the right way, yet also find the right time for self-development and making that a priority. It's certainly not easy, but it's important, right? I mean, because if you're not doing it, as you said, you're not going to make a difference, or you're not going to get any better in the courtroom. And that's something that I've started to, I think, pay a little bit more attention to When a few years ago, I used to think, oh, you just got to, whoever has the most trials, like that's great. But it's not that. It's to what we were talking about earlier. It's experience coupled with intentional training / practice, right? And so you could have 100 trials, but still not be terribly good because you haven't put in the time to really develop those skills. Whereas you could only have a few trials under your belt, but you've put in the time to get the right training. And so you're already off to the races compared to those who've been at it for a lot longer.
Training, we do these boot camps. My next one coming up was with Joe Freed on trucking cases. And so there'll be, I think there's 13 people registered right now. Our first Zoom is today on orientation, but there's going to be 7 weeks of Zoom orientation. And it's a 5-day boot camp where we cover witness prep and direct examination, cross-examination, performance skills, which are presentation skills, are opening and closing, and voir dire. So the key aspects of trial and best practices. In addition to that, Joe's going to work with everybody by Zoom and in person on whatever aspects of the case that they need help on. And so these boot camps are really super high level learning of strategy by one of the top people in the game. So that's just one example. I mean, Kimball Jones is doing a boot camp on insurance bad faith, Pat Salvi on, medical malpractice, Kurt Zahner on premises. So I got these people at the top of their game doing, that's just some example, doing these boot camps where you get strategy and heavy duty learning. So that's just another added layer of practice, but also, a lot of people find the TLU on demand very valuable, but I think that's much better for learning strategy than learning skills. Because skills, you got to practice, and you got to kind of have a coach to get better at skills. So
you and your efforts with TLU, big reason why I believe the plaintiff's bar has elevated as much as it has in the last few years. So the opportunities are there. So then actually kind of answered the question I was about to ask you. So I'll phrase this last question a little bit differently. If you could go back in time, Dan, and you just graduated from law school, just passed the bar, what would you tell yourself knowing that you wanted to be a trial lawyer?
What I would tell myself, what I do differently is I never understood. I would go to every CLE, every criminal NACDL. I'm just trying to get a nugget here and there. But I never really understood what this performance thing was about, and that I could actually get perhaps a performance coach for trial performance, because I would do the best I could, learn the right techniques from the very beginning, so that every trial, those last 175, 180 trials I've done, I was intentional with everything I did. I was using each one of those as a performance of something that I'd rehearsed and trained, and not just doing the best I prepared, but that was all substantive not preparing on the performance. And so if you can master the performance of trial, you are so far along that's crazy. So I would say learn the skills, not just the theory and strategy. Everybody can get you that. You sit on your ass and get lectured to. Figure out how to get up and look and find every opportunity you can to put yourself out in front of people too, whether it's speaking at a wedding, being the best man, where it's being the MC at at TLU. Every track has an MC. Some, people take advantage of that. Say, I want to be the MC. They get a chance to be up in front of people. Deal with those little insecurities we all suffer from. Every chance we get up and present and perform.
Well, Dan, it's been a pleasure having you, man. Thank you so much. Thank you for all that you've done for me and the trial lawyer community. And I'm sure I'll see you at a TLU coming soon. Now, you're not doing Vegas this year, but I expect
that's
you will
right.
be doing Huntington next year.
June 10th through 13th. And we're going to have a golf scramble on June 9th. And I'm going to say I'm about the restaurant at that hotel for dinner on the June 9th. It's going to be so much cooler. This year was awesome. Next year, we had over 800 people this year. Next year, we have over 1,100 people. So if you want to stay at the Paseo, you better get registered soon, because I'm pretty sure it'll be sold out by the end of August. Yeah. So it's going to be awesome. Hopefully you make it there next year, Sharif.
Yeah, no, last time I went, it was really great. So I'll definitely make it a priority to try and get out there. So awesome. Well, Dan, this has been fun. Obviously, we'll stay in touch and come on out to Virginia at some point. It seems like much of this trial lawyer stuff is all on the West Coast, and so we're missing some of it out here. But
coming to the East.
That's right.
Lots of friends in Virginia, South Carolina. Perfect.
That's
all
right.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of RVA Trial Lawyers, Virginia's Trial Lawyer podcast. For more episodes, check out rvatriallawyers.com.